So you heard that I have some connection with this chap on the screen. And the reason I have him up there is because although humanity has been interested in dreams for centuries, it was, in a sense, Sigmund Freud who first tried to bring the matter of dreams, what they're all about, what they're for, into science. Now, that was in the late 1800s. Freud's famous book, The Interpretation of Dreams, was published in 1899, although on the title page it says 1900. It's obviously trying to make it look modern. And in that book, he sets out a model of how dreams work, which I'll tell you about in a moment. But more important was the method upon which he based that model. The method was nothing more than asking people to say everything that came into their heads in relation to every element in the dream that they remembered from, say, the night before. This was the free association method. So, according to Freud, if you do that, and if you freely do allow everything that comes into your head to be put into words, then these sort of streams of associative thoughts all connect up in an unexpected way and reveal, says Freud, a sort of underlying structure to the apparently meaningless dream. And according to Freud, this underlying meaningful entity that you can discern if you follow his method is that every dream is an attempt to fulfill a heartfelt, basic wish. You will all have noticed that in your own dreams, you don't fulfill heartfelt, basic wishes. In fact, most dreams are quite horrid things. And Freud said, well, that's because it gets disguised and distorted. Because if you were to see what you really want, it might distress you, and this might wake you up. So this is why it's called interpreting the dream. The dream on the face of it is not the actual thought process. The actual thought process is behind the scenes and has to be inferred. Now, you can see why not everybody thought this was a convincing basis upon which to build a theory of dreaming. But that's what Freud did, and that's why I say it was, in a sense, Freud who brought it into science. At least he thought he was doing science. Karl Popper, who sort of is the authority more than any other recognized for deciding what is and what is not science, differed from Freud on that point. He said famously that psychoanalysis is pseudoscience. That's the word he used, by which he meant it looks like science. It has all the trappings of science, but actually it isn't science. And the shibboleth for Popper is, does it give rise to testable and falsifiable predictions? So in the case of dreams, as I just told you, Freud says, well, the dream doesn't look as if it's fulfilling a wish, but if you follow my method, you can discern, you can infer that actually there's a wish there. And Popper correctly points out, well, how the hell do you falsify that? If you say there's a wish there, then how can I show you there isn't a wish there? There's no prediction that can be tested and found to be false. So it's on that basis that he said this is a pseudoscience. Leaving that aside, let me come back to what Freud claimed. He claimed, as I said in that book, he drew up, he made a model of what he thinks is going on in the mind during sleep, and the model works like this. He says that the mind can be divided into roughly two parts. The one part registers the outside world, and this he called the ego, and the other part registers the inside world of the subject, and this he called the id. And the id sort of registers therefore the state of the body and all of your basic needs and urges and wishes and wants. When you go to sleep, says Freud, the ego switches off. So you close your eyes, switch off your thoughts and externally reality orientated bits and pieces, but you can't switch off your head, says Freud, because it's regulating, the vital needs of the organism. So during sleep, says Freud, the balance of power shifts, whereas normally the ego is inhibiting with all of the reality constraints, it's inhibiting the id, that is to say all these basic urges. During sleep, that inhibition is lifted when the ego goes to sleep, and then the id makes hay while the sun shines. Now, please notice there's a curious problem with this theory, which is that, well, if all of your inhibitions are lifted while you're sleeping and all of your urges, wants, and wishes come, popping out, then how the hell do you stay asleep? And Freud said that's why you dream. He says that the dream is an attempt to in an hallucinatory, delusional way, to kid you into thinking that your wishes and wants and desires are being fulfilled. That's what Freud said. So the dream, the function of the dream, according to Freud, is paradoxically to protect sleep. It enables you to stay asleep. Okay. Now, it's not only Popper who found this all implausible. Many people found it all to be implausible, but some did not, and they were called psychoanalysts. And this dream theory ended up becoming a sort of foundation stone for the whole of psychoanalytic theory, because Freud, having built this model of how the mind works during sleep in order to explain his findings about dreams, he then went on to expand on that model to build a theory of how the mind in general works, starting with the not irrational point that dreams are a form of madness. If we can understand the psychotic process of dreams, then perhaps this gives us some insight into other mechanisms underpinning not only psychosis, but psychopathology as a whole, and and so on and so on. Now, we tend to forget this, but that theory, the psychoanalytic theory, was very authoritative at one time in psychiatry. In the 1940s and 50s and 60s, you really could not get a tenured position in a psychiatry department in America if you were not a psychoanalyst. It was considered like a necessary basic qualification. To be a psychiatrist is you have to train in psychoanalysis. And America, was then also the center of the world. So American psychiatry was entirely dominated by psychoanalysis, and the knock-on effect was, in a sense, world psychiatry was to a large extent dominated by psychoanalysis. And as I've told you, the psychoanalytical model of the mind started with the theory of dreams. And so this theory, a lot hangs on it, and a lot hung on it in those days. So it was, I'm sure, something of an embarrassment to psychiatry that it was so dominated by a theory which ultimately starts with a model about dreams, all of which rests upon this method, which I've already explicated to you, which is, hardly reassuringly rigorous. So they were delighted when in the early 1950s, something called REM sleep was discovered. REM sleep, well, at that stage it was called paradoxical sleep. The paradox being that these chaps, Azarinsky and Kleitman, put surface electrodes on people sleeping, measuring brain activity. It's called an EEG, and they predicted that the fast zigzags of the brain in waking will become slower and slower and slower as you go to sleep, and indeed that's exactly what happens. Here you are awake, and your brain waves go slower and slower and slower as you fall asleep. This is time, and this is brain activity. The paradox was that after roughly 90 minutes, the brain becomes very active again, then goes back to sleep, and then becomes very active again in roughly 90-minute cycles throughout the night. The paradox is, why are you asleep when you have this very active brain state? But have that very active brain state, you do. And in fact, it's not only that your brain becomes more activated, your eyes start darting about, and the saccadic eye movements are what later gave this state the name REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. The other outstanding feature of REM sleep is that your muscles are paralyzed. So those three things together, activated brain, rapid eye movements, and flaccid skeletal musculature are the cardinal features of it. Other things happen too. Your heart rate goes up, your breathing becomes shallow and rapid, your core body temperature changes, you get an erection if you're a boy. And if you're a girl, it's just easier to see it if you're a boy. So, you know, you're in all sorts of ways in an aroused state during REM sleep. And Azarinsky and Kleitman, having discovered this, formulated the hypothesis that this brain state, this paradoxical brain state during sleep, might be the physiological equivalent of the paradoxical mental state that happens during sleep, which is dreaming. The paradox there being you're asleep, that is to say unconscious, and yet suddenly you're conscious. And you're having very active, very energetic mental events occurring. The opposite, in a way, of sleep. So they thought, well, that's what the brain is doing every 90 minutes. We know during sleep, the mind does something like paradoxically become active. So our hypothesis is that these two things are the same thing. That dreaming is the psychological experience or the subjective correlate of the objective physiological state of rapid eye movement sleep. And like good scientists, they made a prediction. They said, if we wake people up there, or there, they're going to report dreams. And if we wake them up there, or there, they're not. That would be a reasonable prediction from the hypothesis that I've just stated, and that is exactly what they found. Well, it wasn't Azarinsky and Kleitman who found that, it was somebody unfortunately named Dement. William Dement and Kleitman tested this hypothesis and confirmed it. They found roughly 90% of awakenings from REM sleep produced dream reports, and roughly 10% or less of awakenings from non-REM sleep produced dream reports. If you consider dreams are, after all, a single witness, retrospective, verbal account of what happened while I was asleep. And as you know, dreams are notoriously difficult to remember. It's pretty good, 90 to 10. It's as close to 100 to 0 as you could reasonably expect, by way of confirmation of their hypothesis. So at last, psychiatry was saved from its embarrassment. There was now an objective physiological state which correlated with dreaming, and we could now start doing proper science on this question of what makes dreams tick, what are dreams all about, what do they reveal to us about how the mind works. This task was made all the easier by virtue of the fact that it's not only human beings who have this cyclical activation during sleep, but in fact all mammals have the same thing, except for one anteater in Australia. I don't know why, but all the rest of us mammals, we have REM sleep. And why that's important is because the classical method for poking about and finding out what in the brain is making this thing happen is to take bits of the brain away and see what it does to the thing that you're interested in. And it's questionable whether one should be allowed to do that with any mammal, but certainly you're not allowed to do it with us, human beings. And so the fact that other mammals also had REM sleep made the task possible of snipping away little bits of brain and seeing which bit was the part that produced the REM sleep. In other words, which bit do we have to remove in order for the REM state to stop? That's the classical sort of ABC method of behavioral neuroscience. So somebody named Sube, Pierre Sube, this is a human brain. He used cats, presumably because they sleep so much, but also because their brains are very similar to ours. And I'm going to show you what Sube found, as if it were in a human, but it was in fact in cats. He sliced the frontal part of the brain away, slowly slicing deeper and deeper down the brain. In other words, he started at the top end of the neuroaxis and sliced progressively deeply into the brain to see at what level do I need to make the cut for REM sleep to stop. And he eventually sliced the entire forebrain off. In other words, leaving the hapless cat with a brain stem only. And to perhaps his surprise, the REM sleep persisted unabated. So that proved that the forebrain, that is to say, the organ of the mind, is not needed to generate REM sleep. And in fact, Sube cut all the way down here, all down there, down here, and it was only when he got to the level of the pons that REM started to falter and was in fact obliterated. Now, here's the spinal cord, here's the medulla oblongata, here's the pons. That's pretty base. This is dreams are generated at a very low level in the neuraxis. This led Sube to come to the not unreasonable conclusion that Freud must have had it horribly wrong, because clearly dreams are not driven by anything mental. Not only, I mean, this part of the brain, it's regulating the sorts of things that I was just talking to you about, things like breathing and heartbeat and body temperature and basic arousal states. There's really very little thinking about your mother that goes on in your pons. And then you have to also remember that it happens automatically every 90 minutes. So kind of no matter what kind of day you had, pretty much a dead certainty that you're going to have REM sleep every 90 minutes on average every night. So Sube came to that conclusion, and then his student Alan Hobson carried on the quest to work out in more detail what it is that generates dreams. And what Hobson found, focusing on the pons, was that there's a group of cells here in the mesopontine tegmentum. These are cholinergic cells. I don't know what audience I'm speaking to, by the way. I'm sorry, I'm assuming you're not all neuroscientists. So these are cholinergic cells, which means that at their terminals, which broadcast very widely in the forebrain, at the synapses, they release a chemical called acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. That's what cholinergic means. So what he found was that these are the cells that switch REM sleep on. They fire in non-REM sleep, they fire at a slow rate, and then just before you go into REM sleep, the rate increases. And that's how they fire in REM. Conversely, two other cell groups in the pons, the nucleus locus ceruleus complex and the dorsal raphe nucleus, which release neurotransmitters called noradrenaline and serotonin, respectively, do the opposite. So when you're in non-REM sleep, they're firing at a rapid rate, and as you go into REM sleep, their rate goes down as the cholinergic rate goes up. So, that's what happens. That's called the reciprocal interaction model of Hobson, published it in '75. And you will notice there's a simple switch. I mean, that's basically what he showed, that there's a switch, a little on-off, in your pons, and it goes on and off automatically every 90 minutes. That's what generates dreams. On the basis of this elegant series of experiments, by the way, it wasn't just lesion studies that he did, single-cell recordings, he did micro-injections of acetylcholine into the mesopontine tegmentum and switched on REM, so on. It really was a done deal after Hobson. There was no question as to what it is that generates REM sleep. Hobson then published a paper in the American Journal of Psychiatry, not a physiological paper, but rather a neuropsychological paper, I suppose is what one should call it, in which he spelled out a model that he called the activation synthesis model of dreaming. And it's a very simple model, which is a good thing. He said the mesopontine tegmental cholinergic cells activate the forebrain. And while they're activating it, it is demodulated because the serotonin and the noradrenaline are down, the spiky acetylcholine is up. So you've got a switched on brain that's demodulated. And so, you know, your poor brain, it's doing stuff with this random activation. As I said, the cholinergic projections are very diffuse and widespread in the forebrain. So the whole forebrain is just switched on like a Christmas tree by intrinsically, essentially, fundamentally meaningless signals. And I emphasize that because, you know, what Hobson was showing is that dreaming is a mindless state. It cannot possibly be motivated. It cannot possibly be the result of wishes and thoughts, and let alone all these gymnastics about censorship and disguise and all of that. You know, it's just a switch where the forebrain is activated and demodulated. The forebrain, as I said, the organ of the mind, has all of your mental representations in it. So, you know, when you switch on the forebrain, you're switching on visual images, auditory images, memories, volitions, thoughts, feelings. And so the brain now has a whole lot of visual things going on, auditory things going on, somatosensory things going on, feelings, memories, you know, blah, blah. What does the poor forebrain do? You know, it's, according to Hobson, well, it just joins all the dots. It synthesizes all of these representations into an episode of an experience. And to quote Hobson, he said, the forebrain makes the best of a bad job. Okay? Again, I must emphasize that it is an intrinsically meaningless mental state. Normally, the forebrain, you know, if you see something, it's because there's something there. You know, your brain is responding to something that your retina is picking up about the world. If you're thinking something, you know, it's because there was something else that led you to think that thing. There's a causal, a meaningful structure to cognition, which does not apply to this state, which is just switching on the lights randomly and joining the dots. Now, Hobson made this important point. He said, of course, you can come afterwards and find meaning in the dream. It doesn't mean that it is inherently meaningful. In other words, it is not caused by psychological, meaningful processes. He made the, I think, good analogy that with the Rorschach test. You know, there's an ink blot, and you show anyone the ink blot, and you say, "What does this mean to you?" And they'd say, "Ooh, it's a vagina." You know, and you say, "Oh, really?" You know, that says something about you. But remember, it isn't a vagina. It's an ink blot. Okay, so the ink blot is inherently meaningless. You can project meaning onto it ex post facto, and Hobson says that's what psychoanalysts do, and their patients. You know, so it's no surprise you find meaning in dreams. You can find meaning in any bloody thing. Looking at the clouds, you can say, "Ooh, it looks like a doggy." You know, but it isn't a doggy. It's a cloud, which is not trying to represent anything in itself. You get it? Okay, that was Hobson. Then, in this very hallowed institution, a Yappy came along. That was me. And I was a neuropsychologist. What am I doing here? And Hobson, you know, all respect to him, you know, to say that the forebrain's job is to synthesize is a little bit of a simplification from a neuropsychological point of view. It's like, what do you mean the forebrain joins things together, you know, synthesizes them? Different parts of the forebrain do different things. We knew that by the 80s, which was when I was here. And so I came up with the idea, not exactly a brilliant idea, that if you take a patient who's got damage to this part of the forebrain, the visual part, maybe they'll have non-visual dreams. And if they have damage to this part of the forebrain, Broca's area, the language production area, maybe they won't speak in their dreams. If they have a lesion here in the motor strip, maybe they will be hemiparetic in their dreams. In fact, that's what you would expect on Hobson's model. The forebrain, all the representations are being randomly activated and joined together. If some of those representations are selectively missing, those can't be part of the synthesis. Do you get it? So I said, okay, let's test this. So I took human beings. Very important that I took human beings. By the way, I didn't cause any damage to anyone, so it took me a long time. I took 361 human beings who had not caused by me, but rather by God, damage to specific parts of their brain, and I collected them together in groups so that I had a group who had damage there, and a group who had damage there, and a group who had damage there, and so on, all over the place. And why they were humans was because I needed to get access to their dream content. So as much as cats and dogs and rats and mice have REM sleep, which by the look of things is their physiological manifestation of their dreaming, we can't ever get access to their dreams. Very important. I'll come back to that. But I had people who could speak, and so I asked them, has anything happened to your dreams? And they told me, slowly but surely, I started to see commonalities. That all the patients with lesions here had this thing, and all the patients with lesions there had that thing in their dream content. We then woke these patients up in REM sleep when they have dreams, when you can have the most direct access to the dreams, and got dream reports to see whether their bedside morning recall was consistent with what you could find in the sleep laboratory. And on the basis of that study, which, as I said, took a long time because it takes a long time to get so many patients with the correct sort of lesions, eventually I was able to come to some conclusions, which I will now show you. Each one of these color-coded, these are facsimiles of brain scans. This is the top of the brain, sliced down, 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 down. That's the bottom of the brain over there. And that's the front, and that's the back. And there you can see where the left and right are, which are in this one not reversed as they normally are. And each of these lesion sites that I'm showing you here led to a reliable, reproducible change, predictable change in the content of dreams. Now, I'm not going to tell you everything that I found because it'll take me too long. I'm going to focus only on the most dramatic findings and, as it happens, the most unexpected findings. Here is the first thing that I found. Patients with damage here, that is to say in the parietal lobe of either hemisphere, they stop dreaming completely. In particular, in the inferior parietal lobule, the supramarginal gyrus. In particular, patients with damage there stop dreaming completely, but they still have REM sleep. You wake them up in REM sleep, they have no dreams to report. Now, that is not so surprising, because the function of the inferior parietal lobule is to synthesize visual information with auditory information, with somatosensory information. So the so-called synthetic function that Hobson spoke of, if there was anywhere in the brain you would expect dreams should stop, it would be there on the basis of Hobson's model. This synthesizing of the different modalities of perception is what mental imagery, episodic thinking is all about. So if you can't generate mental imagery, how are you going to generate dreams? So that was not surprising, but I'm just telling you that was the first dramatic finding, is that there's a lesion site in the brain which leads to loss of dreaming in toto. I know from experience when I give this talk, people say, how do you know that they were dreaming but couldn't remember their dreams? You know, so if you want to ask me that later. We know, I'll tell you that. But these are the two other lesion sites I want to tell you about.
Patients with damage in this red area here, bilaterally, if they have damage to both frontal lobes, in the ventromesial, that's the low, deep quadrant, in the white matter, damage there on both sides leads also to loss of dreaming. And that's not at all obvious why that should be the case, but it is the case. In fact, here I've got an old facsimile of scans showing you these are the patients who didn't dream with this lesion site. That shows you exactly where the lesion site was. So you wake these patients up from REM sleep. Well, first of all, you ask them at the bedside, anything changed in your dreams since your stroke or whatever? And they say, oh, funnily enough, I don't dream at all anymore. Then you put them in the lab, you wake them up at REM sleep, you say, tell me what was passing through your mind. They say, I told you, I don't dream anymore, nothing was passing through my mind. Okay, they don't speak as eloquently as that necessarily, but you get the idea. Now, the third group that I want to show you is this group here, the light blue area over there. That is, so the second group, they have white matter lesions there. Okay. Now, the group that I've shown you third, they have lesions there. Remember that area, mesopontine tegmental. The surprise was that these patients, well, what was not surprising is that they lose REM sleep. Well, that's, you know, same as you find in cats and the same as you find in rats. You damage the mesopontine tegmental, REM stops. But the surprise was that dreaming did not stop. Now, as I told you, I'm a Yapi. Here I was at WITS in the 1980s, working at this hospital in Barra. And, you know, I've got all these patients who have damage to the mesopontine tegmentum that everybody knows generates REM sleep and therefore dreams, and yet they're dreaming. Who's going to believe that? So I go and look at the literature. You know, surely somebody else has shown some bits before that damage there leads to loss of dreaming, because we all know that REM sleep is dreaming and REM sleep is generated there. And to my absolute amazement, not one single case had ever been published, not one case, let alone one group study. Never had anybody shown in anyone that a mesopontine tegmental lesion leading to loss of REM sleep also leads to loss of dreaming. So that's why I said earlier it's important to have human beings, because they can speak and they can tell you about all of the studies that once REM and dreaming had been correlated in humans. Then we left out the dreaming side of it and studied only the REM part of it in order to find the brain mechanisms in other animals who can't tell you anything about their dreams. And if we had just, you know, done it with human beings in the simple way that I did, which really is the ABC, it's like the thing you have to do if you're going to say this part of the brain generates dreams, then, you know, you've got to show that when you take that part of the brain away, you take dreams away. When I accidentally did that, because as I said, I wasn't testing Hobson's, nobody questioned Hobson's theory. I accidentally, to my absolute amazement, found, first of all, that damage here does lead to loss of REM sleep, but does not lead to loss of dreaming, and nobody had ever tested it. Now, those of you who neuropsychologists will know that what I've just described is called a double dissociation of function. That is the gold standard in neuropsychology. If you're going to say that a brain region performs a function, then you've got to show that the removal of that region leads to a loss of that function. But double dissociation shows even more. It says damage here leads to loss of dreaming, but not loss of REM sleep. Damage here leads to loss of REM sleep, but not loss of dreaming. That means dreaming and REM sleep are two different things. They are doubly dissociable. They cannot possibly be the same thing. Do you get it? So that was amazing. We're now in the mid-1990s, by the way, and I published that. Please note the methodological mistake. It's like a first-year mistake. You know, correlation is not causation. Because two things happen at the same time doesn't mean. So, like babies cry when they're hungry. So, you know, if you want to understand the mechanism of crying, you don't look in the gut. You know, it's the that these two things happen together, but they're not the same thing. Do you understand? And that's the level of mistake that Hobson had made. So now my focus shifted to this area. As I told you, it's no surprise that parietal lesions lead to loss of dreaming, but this deep bifrontal white matter lesion leading to loss of dreaming was a big surprise. So the question became, what is it? What's going on in this part of the brain? What function is being performed by this part of the brain, which is obviously so essential to dreams, because when that function is gone, dreams are gone. Now, that part of the brain is spaghetti junction, this white matter from everywhere to everywhere. So it was not obvious to me at all, what was the critical bit that led to the loss of dreaming. But looking at these scans led me to an hypothesis. None of you are old enough to have this historical memory that this scan reminds you of something if you're old enough, and that is, this is where they used to do the modified prefrontal leucotomy. It's exactly where they produced the lesion in fact, thousands of psychotic patients in the 40s and the 50s. Why did they produce? Well, they used to cut the whole frontal lobe off. It was called frontal lobotomy. And this helped in the sense that the patients got dramatically better in terms of their hallucinations and delusions. But they got dramatically worse in terms of no longer having frontal lobes. And also, it's a big operation. So there was lots of not only morbidity, but also mortality. So they tried to find where could we make the smallest lesion that leads to the reduction in hallucinations and delusions without having to take away the whole of the frontal lobe, and it turned out that that's where you make the lesion. Exactly there. It was called modified prefrontal leucotomy, or the orbital undercutting procedure of Freeman and Watts. So I went back to that literature, which dates back to the 50s, where psychiatry was still dominated by psychoanalysts, who are, as I've told you, very interested in dreams. And I wanted to see, did any of these psychiatrists who ordered this operation, did any of them ask the patients about their dreams after the operation? And to my amazement, they did. When I say to my amazement, it's because somehow, the sleep scientists didn't read the psychiatric or psychosurgical literature and vice versa. Had they read each other's journals, they would have seen there's a big mistake being made here, because it was reported in hundreds of cases in the 1950s that the operation, the modified prefrontal leucotomy, leads to, number one, dramatic reduction in hallucinations and delusions, number two, loss of motivation, number three, loss of dreams. Jerome Frank in America published a series of 500 cases. Partridge in England, 350 cases. Schindler in Germany, I can't remember, but something like 300 cases. And Schindler went so far as to say, if the patient continues to dream, it's a bad prognostic sign. It means the operation hasn't worked. And that made me think, well, that makes sense, because if you can generate a dream, you can generate an hallucination and a delusion, because that's what dreams are. So that's what put me onto the hypothesis that I'm going to tell you now. Remember, I said it's spaghetti junction there. There's everything connecting to everything. And my question was, what is the specific fiber pathway here that's the critical one for generating dreams in this mishmash? And this operation was superseded by what was then called major tranquilizers. That is to say, antipsychotic drugs. When antipsychotic drugs came onto the market, the modified prefrontal leucotomy was no longer necessary. Why? It's because there's a fiber pathway coursing through exactly there that is a dopaminergic pathway that is blockaded by antipsychotic drugs. So, in other words, that operation was severing a pathway which antipsychotic drugs inhibit. So my hypothesis was, that's the pathway
that's necessary for dreams. And that pathway I'll now show you, it's there. And this slide, by the way, these things slip. This says VTA, which should actually be here. Okay. And this says lateral hypothalamus, which should be here. This says nucleus accumbens, that says prefrontal cortex. This pathway starts in the ventral tegmental area, VTA, and it projects via the lateral hypothalamus to various structures, amygdala, mesial, and other prefrontal cortical structures, but most importantly to the nucleus accumbens. So it's from VTA to nucleus accumbens, and it is a dopamine mediated system. Now, Hobson said that there are over here cholinergic pathways, which they are, from the basal forebrain, the acetylcholine producing nuclei here, that also course through there. And remember, he said REM was a cholinergic state, and so he said he thinks it's the cholinergic pathways through here. By the way, I lost respect for him at that point, because his original theory was that the mesopontine tegmentum via thalamus projects to cortex and generates REM sleep, not here. And suddenly he just shifted the whole thing to a different place in order to save his bacon about acetylcholine. But the wonderful thing about science is when you disagree, you can test it. And you make one prediction and you make another prediction and you see which one is confirmed and which one's disconfirmed. In this case, if you block acetylcholine with anticholinergics, you should block dreaming. You do block REM sleep, but now it's a matter of, do you block dreaming with anticholinergics? And antipsychotics should block dreaming, according to me. According to Hobson, scopolamine, an anticholinergic, should stop dreams. I don't know if any of you know what happens if you give anticholinergics to dreams, but now we know because we did the critical experiment, and what it shows is that it increases dreams. And in fact, the patients dream while they're awake too. So the very opposite of what is predicted by Hobson's hypothesis. And with antipsychotics, it suppresses dreams. So the Yapi is right and the Hobson is wrong. That's one method. We use multiple methods. Here's a PET imaging study, not done by me, but by Alan Brown. And you see the pathway I'm talking about switched on full blast in REM sleep. And so indeed is the whole of the limbic system. And there's the parietal site that I told you about. If I had gone through all of those lesions in the pretty picture I showed you, I would be able to demonstrate to you how beautifully the functional imaging maps onto the lesion studies. Every area that we found when damaged changes an aspect of dreaming, the imaging study shows that those areas are activated during dreaming. So there was a wonderful correspondence. In fact, let me tell you about one such lesion site. Prefrontal convexity lesions. That is not the deep white matter, but the convexity of the prefrontal cortex. We found damage there has no effect on dreams. So you can have the most whopping great frontal lobe lesions, which really disables your cognition in waking life, but your dreams are, blind raters can't distinguish frontal lobe patients' dreams from yours and mine. And the imaging studies show, yep, frontal lobes doing nothing during dreaming sleep. But by contrast, that deep white matter that I spoke about earlier is doing a hell of a lot. So lesion studies show that this is the important area. Imaging studies show that this is the important area. Pharmacological probes, it's not just a matter of blocking those systems. You can also excite those systems. You give levodopa, a dopamine agonist. What does it do? It doesn't increase REM sleep, but it increases dreaming big time. In fact, any one of you, in fact, this is why, as I said, antipsychotic medications focus on that circuit. It's because you have too much dopamine there. Even you and me, us not psychotic people, you activate that system chemically, you will have hallucinations. With our Parkinson's disease patients, that's a constant danger. When we give them dopamine agonists to treat the Parkinson's disease, if you give them too much, you will push them into a psychosis.
And one of the ways that you know that you're pushing them into a psychosis is they start to have a lot of very vivid dreams. Pharmacological probes up and down confirm that this is the thing that generates dreams, this dopamine pathway. Lesion studies confirm it, imaging studies confirm it. For me, the two studies that absolutely sealed the deal were these two studies. This one showing that the ventral tegmental area, those neurons that I showed you, this area here, those cells fire during REM sleep in rapid bursts, like that. And burst firing makes for the maximal release of the neurotransmitter. And consistent with that was this study where they did microdialysis, looking at levels of dopamine, actually measuring the levels of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens during REM sleep versus non-REM sleep, and you get maximal release of dopamine into the nucleus accumbens during REM sleep, which, remember, is when you're having your dreams. It's not that the REM mechanism doesn't generate the dreams, but the two things happen simultaneously. So during REM sleep, this system, well, this one is doing all the heavy lifting. This is what generates dreams. All of those methods, as I say, all the converging evidence shows this is the one. And it's not surprising, given what we know about that system in relation to hallucinations and psychosis. Now, here comes the interesting thing. Why should this system be so important for dreams? What does it tell us about what dreams are? You know, that's the value of neuropsychology, is you find out which brain region is important for a mental function, so that you can learn something new about that mental function. Now, this system, this dopamine system, whoops, I've got to speak much faster. I'm sorry, I'm going to go about 10 minutes over, okay. This system is given different names by different theorists. Some people call it the seeking system. Some call it the reward system. Some call it the wanting system. If you look at those words, reward, wanting, seeking, there's a common denominator. This is a positive motivational system. It is, in a word, a foraging system. When you activate this system, the animal forages. It sniffs the air, it pitches its whiskers, it wags its tail, and looks for stuff. In human beings, if you snort cocaine, which I know none of you have ever done, but I'm sure you know people who've done it. And if you look at the way they behave when they've snorted cocaine, then you know what this system does. Because cocaine activates just exactly this system. And they become all racy and all active and all sort of interactive. And something's going to happen tonight. Going to the party. You go to the party. I'm going to go to the party. I don't know what's going to happen. I think it's going to be a good time. I'm going to be there. Check out the scene. So activated, enthusiastic, optimistic foraging, cruising, looking for a good time. That's what this system does. Now, you have the very paradox that we started with. How on earth do you stay asleep when your mesocortical, mesolimbic dopamine reward-seeking system is switched on? Where's this quote? Oh, there it is. Direct stimulation of that pathway leads to the most energized exploratory and search behaviors an animal is capable of exhibiting. And yet it's asleep. Okay, so that was that. So please note, first I found REM sleep and dreaming are not the same thing. Secondly, I found that this system generates the dreams. Thirdly, the question becomes, what does that tell us about the psychology of dreams? And that's where I'm ending my talk. Okay, so this is what occurred to me. You ask any behavioral neuroscientist, if you say, what do you think this person's doing? The last thing they're going to say is they're sleeping. They're going to say, well, it looks like they snorted cocaine and switched their frontal lobes off. They must be doing something really hot. Their whole limbic system is activated and this dopamine system is switched on like hell, and their frontal regulation is gone. They're bonking or something, But we know they're sleeping. So this was my thought. Remember that old theory of Freud's? He said, behind the dream, there's this motivated, wishful, positive, reward-seeking state. That looks pretty much like that. And he says the ego is switched off, has gone to sleep. And that looks pretty much like that. So, you know, maybe he was right. Dreams are a motivated state. REM sleep is not a motivated state, but dreaming is a motivated state. And perhaps the dreaming is trying to keep you asleep, because for heaven's sake, it's a hell of a hard to sleep with that thing switched on like that. So I had this idea. Let's go to these patients, the parietal patients who can't dream. We know they can't dream due to damage to the image generating machinery. And they can't make mental images, so they can't dream. But this part is still working, so they should wake up. If dreams protect sleep, then these patients who don't dream, but who do still have this dopaminergic activation during sleep, they should not be able to sleep properly. Do you agree? So here, finally, Mr. Popper, finally, we can have a falsifiable prediction. And so I set about testing it. Now I'm going to tell you some results of a study that is not yet published. Okay? But the results are so stark that. So what did I predict? I predicted that you take patients with parietal lesions, and these patients all had non-hemorrhagic thrombotic infarctions in the same arterial field, in the same area, same matched for age, matched for the underlying disease, matched for how long ago the stroke happened, etc. The only thing that distinguished the two groups were some of them dreamt and some of them didn't dream. Okay? And so my prediction was the non-dreamers will have worse sleep than the dreamers. Everything else is the same about these patients, except one lot of them don't dream. So this thing is going to wake them up, if dreams protect sleep. Now, before I tell you my findings, the really important thing to note is what I've already said, that this is a testable hypothesis. The prediction is either going to be confirmed or not confirmed. For me, that's the important thing. I, for one person, if these patients who can't dream don't have bad sleep, then I will never believe that dreams protect sleep. So that's the important thing, is that you can test it. So my hypotheses, I'll say them just very quickly, were that there'll be less total sleep time in the non-dreamers, that they will have more awakenings than the dreamers, that they will have more what are called arousals, which are basically brief awakenings, and they'll have more macro arousals, which are basically very, very, very brief awakenings. Okay, so all the parameters by which we measure, you know, things staying asleep or not staying asleep, I predicted all of those were going to be worse in the non-dreamers, which also is importantly because it's a counterintuitive prediction. You know, if the lay person, you say, if you can't dream, will you sleep better or worse? They'll say you sleep better because you're having sleep not disturbed by dreams. But this hypothesis, if dreams protect sleep, it predicts the opposite. So now I'll show you what I found. This is a hypnogram, same as the idealized one I showed you at the beginning, except this is a real one. So this is brain arousal, brain activation, and this is time. This is switching off the lights. This is 8 hours. This is switching on the lights. Okay. This was my first patient, a non-dreaming patient, the first one I put into the sleep lab, and look what happened. She stayed awake for 2 hours. Then she fell asleep and woke up immediately afterwards. Then she had a little bit of sleep, and then the rest of the night just kept on not being able to stay asleep. Okay? From REM she woke up, from REM she woke up. That is called sleep onset insomnia. And that is called sleep maintenance insomnia. That, in other words, this is really bad sleep. This one looks sad, like New York City. Look at that. Goes to sleep, wakes up, 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 goes to sleep. We get the idea. Wakes up all the time. From REM, every time you go into REM, you wake up. Okay, now watch this one. This was my third case. Have you ever seen a worse hypnogram in your life? I mean, this patient stayed awake for 4 hours and a bit, then had a few seconds of sleep there, really made an effort to sleep there, and you know, then lights were on after 8 hours. That's the worst I've ever seen. You know, people say, I didn't sleep at all last night. we put in the sleep lab, they actually sleep a hell of a lot more than they think they do. But this person really didn't sleep at all last night. These, by the way, are the arousals, these red things here. Look at this. So again, same thing, sleep maintenance, insomnia, and now I'll show you the findings. Total sleep time, on average with dreamers, 375 minutes, with non-dreamers, 267 minutes. Okay, so it's quite a big difference. Now we have to measure awakenings. You can't, if you have so much difference in total sleep time, it distorts the findings. So you have to say awakenings per hour of sleep. Okay, so that's called an awakenings index. How many awakenings per hour of sleep? Oh, sorry, that's just percentage of sleep. Of course, that's the same as that. Okay. Here is sleep efficiency is just another thing. Sorry. So as you can see, they have inefficient sleep. Here's the thing about awakenings. Dreamers have 3.5 awakenings per hour of sleep. Non-dreamers have 12.5 awakenings per hour of sleep. I call that confirmation of the hypothesis. I mean, here's the arousal index, which is 1 minute. Arousals are just 1 minute of awakening. They have 48.5 of those per hour of sleep, whereas dreamers have 19 per hour of sleep. Big differences. And this is the micro arousals, same thing. I mean, really, really dramatic, significant differences between dreamers and non-dreamers, thereby confirming that, as it happens, dreams protect sleep. Doesn't mean it's the only thing that they do, but there's one thing that they do. This is the first time that we have any evidence for any theory about why we dream. All these years, we've all known that we dream, and we spend a hell of a lot of time dreaming, but there's never been any scientifically demonstrated function for dreams. As I say, I really don't believe this is by any means the only function of dreams, but one function of dreams is, evidently, they help you to stay asleep. The other thing that we can say is that they are a motivated, meaningful state. And so one has to apologize to Freud if one is called Hobson. When I first published in the 90s my double dissociation between REM and dreaming, Hobson reviewed it very favorably, to his great credit. Then in the early 2000s, when I started focusing on this dopamine system and finding that this is the mechanism that generates the dreams, I went to Harvard and spoke to his group about it, and they received me very well. I then brought him to my group. I was in London at that stage, and we received him very well. And in my discussions with him, I said, Alan, I think maybe Freud wasn't so wrong. When he got home, he sent me an email, and he said, this is what he said, and I kept it. I even printed it out. He said, Mark, did I hear you right that you said you're going to interpret your findings to support Freud? Because, as you know, I've acknowledged your findings, but if you're going to use them to support Freud, then I'm not going to acknowledge your findings. Jeez, science, poof, out the window. Freud does that to people. So we had a debate, him and me, in 2006, before, as I told you, this study, I'm still busy doing it. I finished doing it, but I haven't yet even written it up and published it. This hadn't yet been done, but we had discovered that this is the thing that drives the dreams. So at that time, in 2006, we had a debate, Hobson and me, at the Tucson Consciousness Conference. And the wonderful thing about having a debate is that then you have a vote afterwards and your colleagues decide who's right and who's wrong. So I thought when they invited me to debate him, this is the last thing I'm going to say. I thought we were going to debate Mark Solms' dream theory versus Alan Hobson's dream theory. But no, Hobson said he won't take part in that debate. I have to defend Freud's dream theory, the 100-year-old one. So the only way I was going to have the opportunity to have this debate, was to agree that, okay, I must defend Freud's dream theory. So I started my presentation saying, Alan wouldn't debate me unless I defended Freud's dream theory. So let me just tell you that this is what I found. That I think that supports Freud's dream theory, but I'm going to tell you what I found. This is my dream theory. And after that debate, our colleagues voted 2-1 in favor of the motion that Freudian dream theory still has some scientific validity, in 2006. And as I said, that's before the sleep protection study came out. So we really do owe Freud an apology. It does not mean that Freud was right about everything about dreams. I personally do not believe a hell of a lot of what Freud said about dreams. But I do think that we owe him an apology, that dreams are motivated mental states, that there's every reason to believe that this person, what's going on in their minds matters to them, and it's heartfelt, and it's emotional, and it's motivated, and it's wishful, and it's desire-driven. Everything else we can leave to the discussion. That's the brain mechanisms of dreaming. Thank you very much.